Kingston, Ontario, a city halfway between Toronto and Montreal, is located on the northeastern end of Lake Ontario and at the beginning of the St. Lawrence River. Settled by Europeans in the 17th century, Kingston became the first capital of a united Canada in 1841. It's variously referred to as the Limestone City and a place where history and innovation thrive. Kingston is also referred to sometimes as Canada's penitentiary city. For more than 170 years, Kingston has been associated with criminal treatment in Canada, including the infamous and now closed Kingston Penitentiary. It was one of the oldest prisons in continuous use in the world at the time of its closure. Today across Canada, there are 58 federal correctional institutions administered by Correctional Services Canada. And of these, 9 are located in the Greater Kingston area. This represents the highest concentration of prisons in the country. But during the summer of 2009, Kingston became the site of what was first thought to be a horrific accident. 3 teenagers and 1 adult were found dead in a vehicle submerged in the water, just north of the Kingston Locks. But as the police would soon learn, this was no accident. And within weeks of the discovery, first-degree murder charges were laid against the girl's father, Mohammad Shafia, his wife, Tooba, and their son, Hamid. Almost immediately, whispers in the media compared the murders to honor killings, the practice of murdering family members considered to have brought shame upon the family name. The publicity for this trial was intense. Why did these 3 people conspire to and murder 4 women in their family? In the eyes of Shafia, the motive was simple. It was a twisted plan to restore their family honor. In his mind, Shafia had been shamed by his daughters through their supposed inappropriate behavior. Shafia believed that a family's honor required that women are controlled by the man of the home. But Shafia had lost control, and he knew it. He didn't approve of the way his daughters dressed, their friends, or their boyfriends, that in the end were basically an open secret. He expected them to wear the hijab and marry a man from Afghanistan. But the sisters rebelled against their father's traditions and customs. At the end of the day, he murdered his daughters because they wanted the freedom to make their own choices, and he couldn't have that. Mohammad Shafia saw them as property, not a person. And if he failed to act, he would be deemed by his culture as weak. This is the story of the Shafia family murders. Mohammad Shafia was born into a middle-class family in Kabul in the early 1950s. He was not an educated man, as he stopped attending school before the 7th grade. However, he was hardworking, and throughout the years became an entrepreneur who turned a small electronic shop into a multi-million-dollar import-export business. Shafia married his first wife, Rona, in 1979. She was the daughter of a retired Army colonel and had 3 sisters and 1 brother. Shafia's mother was actually the first one who noticed her and helped to arrange their marriage. Rona also kept a diary that outlined the details of how the 2 were introduced and the years of abuse that came afterwards. According to Rona's diary, after she married Shafia, her life began a downward spiral. Sadly, Rona was unable to have children. This was devastating news, and the couple spent the next 7 years traveling back and forth to India for repeated fertility treatments. These unfortunately were unsuccessful, and as a result, the relationship further declined. According to her diary, Shafia started picking on her. He wouldn't allow her to go visit her mother, and at home he would find fault with her cooking and would find excuses to harass her. Finally, after nearly a decade, she told Shafia to go and take another wife. So that's exactly what he did, as well as saying that he would continue to pay for fertility treatments. Tooba Mohammad Yahya was 17 years old and a relative of one of Shafia's friends. He was twice her age, old enough to be her father. According to Shafia, it was Rona who picked his second bride. And it was also Rona who planned the reception at the same hotel where Rona and Shafia were married, and Rona was in the wedding party. Rona's memory was somewhat different, saying that she was, quote, visited with a new catastrophe. Tooba wasn't exactly thrilled either. Honestly, looking at this wedding photo, nobody looks particularly happy. Within a few weeks of the wedding, Tooba was pregnant. And in September of 1989, Zainab was born. Rona took on the role of surrogate mother. She helped Tooba care for Zainab and the chores at home, while still hoping for a child of her own. And just 1 year after Zainab was born, Hamid would be born on September 30th, 1990. But even in those early days, Rona could see what was happening. According to her diary, Tooba had schemed to gradually separate her from Shafia. On October 1991, Sahar was born, and Tooba gifted the baby girl to Rona to raise as her own. But it wasn't long before Tooba made another announcement, that Shafia should stay 3 nights with her and 1 night with Rona. Quote, because she had given Sahar to me, I agreed. Throughout the Soviet invasion between 1979 and 1989, Shafia's businesses thrived. However, in 1992, it was interrupted when Afghanistan broke out into civil war. The Shafias fled to Pakistan, where they would stay for the next 4 years. Although, according to Mohammad, he never felt that his family was safe in Pakistan because of the Taliban, saying that, quote, liberal people like his Afghan family were easy targets for persecution. At the time, Tooba was pregnant with her 4th child, another daughter. The girl's identity is protected by a publication ban and is referred to in the media as A. But during the trial, there was plenty of evidence brought forward about her role within the Shafia household. She was described as a standout student who spied on her sisters and reported back to her mother and father. Another sibling, who we'll refer to as B, was also born in Pakistan. He too was also a family snitch, telling on the girls regularly and defending his parents from the witness stand at their future trial. Geeti was baby number 6. Shortly after she was born, the family moved again, this time to the United Arab Emirates. It was here that Shafia launched a new company, and his business thrived. He became the top Panasonic dealer in the country barely 1 year after arriving in Dubai. He would later expand his business to include used cars, imported from the United States. It was in Dubai that Shafia's children were exposed to Western culture for the first time. Although the United Arab Emirates is an Islamic country, the children attended a private American school where they wore uniforms and learned to speak English and met kids from around the world. For Rona, though, the move left her feeling more ostracized than ever. She wrote in her diary about Tooba learning how to drive, buying as much gold jewelry as she pleased, and implementing all the schemes she had to position herself as the preferred wife. While in Dubai, Tooba gave birth for the last time. This child is protected by the same publication ban and is referred to as C. Although the Shafias stayed in Dubai for more than a decade, they spent much of that time searching for a new home, a place that could offer them citizenship, not just residency. In 2000, the family attempted to move to New Zealand. The Shafias applied for visas, but Rona wasn't approved for medical reasons. Instead, they would move to Australia, and Shafia's businesses were once again successful. Although the story behind what happened in Australia and why the Shafias left the country after living there only 1 year changes depending on who you ask. According to Rona's diary, the Australian government declared Shafia undesirable. He hadn't created any opportunities for Australians. He only created wealth for himself. He also ignored the rules of his visa and purchased property. But at Shafia's murder trial, he testified the reason the family left was because he was out of the country for business too often, and Tooba was feeling isolated and alone in Australia, so the family moved back to Dubai. By 2007, the Shafias had traveled more than halfway around the world and had lived in 5 different countries. But they were still looking for a permanent home, so they looked to Canada, as Tooba had family in Montreal. Shafia applied to Quebec's Immigrant Investor Program. which provides visas to wealthy foreigners in exchange for a large check made out to the province. Back then, the required amount was $400,000. It has since doubled to $800,000. Shafia had no trouble covering the costs for the visas. His only dilemma was figuring out how he was going to hide the truth about his 2 wives, which was a violation of Canadian law that would have nullified his application. In the end, he listed only Tooba on his paperwork. He hadn't yet figured out what to do with Rona. So, in June 2007, while the rest of the family boarded a plane to Canada, Rona was sent to live with relatives in Europe, staying with her sister in France and Tooba's brother in Germany. Polygamous marriages are not recognized in Canada, so Shafia made up a story that Rona was a relative who was being brought over to work as a housekeeper. On paper, at least, Mohammad Shafia was the perfect immigrant investor. Within months of arriving, he bought a $2 million strip mall in Laval and paid for it in cash, and launched an import-export firm that dealt in clothing, household goods, and construction materials. He also purchased land in the suburb of Brossard and was building a large $900,000 home. But the transition to life in Montreal wasn't easy for the family. The children had to attend French language school, even though they had only studied at an English school in Dubai. Rona spoke French but had few occasions to speak it, as she was basically ignored or abused. And Mohammad and Tooba spoke basically no English or French. The children essentially became their interpreters. While waiting for their home to be finished, the Shafias spent 2 years living in a rental home in St. Leonard, split between 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. They didn't even bother to unpack most of their furniture from Dubai. Instead of beds, the children slept on brown mats spread out on the floor. The whole thing was very strange. It didn't really look like the home of a world-traveling businessman. What happened in that home between June 2007 and June 2009 was disturbing, to say the least. That house became a virtual prison. By fall 2007, 6 months after everyone else arrived, Rona was on her way to Canada. She arrived on a temporary visitor's visa. Shafia was supposedly her cousin, and she was his live-in nanny. Friends and relatives knew that Rona was Shafia's first wife, but until she died, the Canadian government had no idea. According to Rona's diary, she was greeted by the same old Tooba. Quote, "Your life is in my hands. You are my servant." Rona moved into a bedroom with Gidi and Sahar. The brothers Hamid and B shared another bedroom, as did Zainab and her younger sister A. The youngest, C, shared a room with mom and dad. However, Shafia spent much more time in Dubai than he ever did in Montreal. During those 2 years before his arrest, he was in Canada for a total of only 6 months. And during those many overseas business trips, Hamid was left in charge. Before the family had moved from Dubai, Mohammad had laid down the law. No one was to date until they finished their education. Actually, when they were old enough they could get married, but no dating was allowed. Hamid seemed to have no problem with this rule, but he also had freedoms the girls didn't have. He traveled on planes to meet up with his father and arranged for tradespeople to do work on the plaza in Laval. He also had his driver's license. His older sister Zainab did none of those things. Her freedom was severely restricted and monitored. She never learned to drive and never had a driver's license. Both Zainab and her younger sister Sahar liked Western fashion. They enjoyed socializing and dating, which would eventually create some ugly conflicts within the Shafia household. Although Zainab was older, she knew she had to hide parts of her life from her younger brother. They were both attending the same Montreal school in February of 2008, when she attracted the attention of Amar Wahil, a young man originally from Pakistan. He sent her a Valentine's Day card, but her response wasn't exactly what he expected. Instead of a date, she responded with a secret email, letting him know the terms of the friendship. Quote, "Be aware of my bro. I will call you when we are at school from a public telephone. We'll talk if my bro is not around, because I don't want to give him the slightest idea that we're friends." Amar agreed to the terms, but it didn't last long. Meeting up was difficult because of the restrictions on Zainab's freedom. even though she was 18 at the time. About a month after that email, while both her parents were visiting Dubai, Zainab invited her new boyfriend to the house. Rona was in the home, and Zainab introduced her to Ammar as her dad's sister. Then suddenly she realized that Hamid was on his way there too. He found Ammar hiding in the garage, shook his hand, and asked him to leave. Zainab never returned to that school again. Her brother told her that until her father and mother returned, he wasn't allowing her to go. And for the next 10 months, she was essentially banished to her room. She didn't go to school, and she couldn't leave the house without a relative by her side. Sahar was struggling as well. She was 16 and still adjusting to life in Canada when her mother accused her of kissing a boy. Tooba even stormed into the school and cornered one of Sahar's teachers, with younger sister A acting as their mother's translator. The teacher, Claudia Delorle, said that she was very angry. Quote, she did not accept her daughter kissing a boy, and that it did not fall within the parameters of her values. Depressed and suicidal, Sahar peeled open one of those white silica gel packs from a shoebox and mixed it with water. Rona and Geeti were hysterical and rushed to Sahar's side after she drank it. But, as Rona wrote in her diary, Tooba was indifferent and didn't move from the kitchen, saying, quote, she can go to hell. Let her kill herself. On May 7, 2008, José Fortin, the vice principal at Sahar's school, met with her face-to-face, and the meeting overall disturbed her. Sahar told her that she was being pressured to wear the hijab, when the conversation took a darker turn. Sahar told her about the suicide attempt she had made just 10 days earlier, telling the vice principal that she wanted to die and that she had had enough. Since October 2007, around the time of her 16th birthday, she had been rejected from the family, and an order was issued not to talk to her. Sahar had also complained that her older brother Hamid had also physically abused her on 2 occasions. Batshaw, Quebec's Anglophone child welfare agency, received the call about the situation the same day. Evelyn Benayoun, a Batshaw intake worker, was put in contact with Sahar. She told Evelyn that she wanted to die because she was extremely sad. Quote, when I initially asked her what she wanted, she said, I want my mother to speak to me. She said she was wishing to die that day, but didn't know how to kill herself. The social worker classified the call as a Code 1 and immediately dispatched a colleague. There wasn't just one problem. There were threats of suicide and physical abuse. But when Jean Rowe, a Batshaw social worker, arrived at the high school, she met with a very different Sahar. Although she was still crying, she denied everything and kept repeating, I don't want you to meet with my parents, I want to go home. According to Jean Rowe, she was very scared of her parents knowing about the report, but didn't explain why. But following protocol, Jean Rowe did call her parents. All of a sudden, Sahar began to recant everything that she told her vice principal. The rejection, the alienation in the family, all not true. The suicide attempt wasn't true, the physical assault by Hamid wasn't true. Tooba arrived at the school first, along with Zainab. She of course denied everything, including the suicide story. Zainab was still under house arrest for her own defiance, so she was dragged along to this meeting as well. She agreed with her mom, but did tell the worker that Sahar was sad about having to wear the hijab. After Jean Rowe had finished talking with Tooba and Zainab and was about to leave the school, Shafia walked in a few minutes later, with Hamid at his side. Jean Rowe specifically remembers Shafia coming in like a storm cloud, saying that he was quite angry and wanted to know the source of the report, and said that he would speak to his lawyer because the report was nothing but lies. All of Sahar's allegations were dismissed, this time by her father, who denied that Hamid had the power to discipline his siblings. 2 days later, when Jean Rowe returned to the school for a follow-up visit, Sahar was wearing the hijab. Quote, there were no tears, but she was still very cautious and minimized the situation. You have to make an assessment if the child is at risk. The child was not at risk at the time. She wanted to go home, so we closed the case. Meanwhile, within the Shafia home, nothing changed. Rona spent her days wandering through parks and using payphones to confide in relatives overseas. One relative was so concerned about Rona that she put her in contact with another distant family member, who was an Afghan women's rights advocate living in Virginia. They never met face to face, but in the year leading up to her death, Rona would phone Fahima Vorget up to 3 times a week. Rona confided in her that she wanted a divorce, but didn't want to leave the children. Her husband ignored and abused her, but wouldn't let her go, and told her that he would kill her if she left. And the elephant in the room was her unsettled immigration status. Although her visitor's visa had been extended several times, and a lawyer was working on her application for permanent residency at Shafia's expense, Rona's life in Canada was based on a lie, and could end at any time. Shafia, as it turns out, was also concerned about her immigration file, but for a very different reason. If the Canadian government discovered the truth about their relationship, the entire family could face deportation. A few months after her 19th birthday, Zainab was finally allowed to return to school, although not the same one where she had met Amar. She took morning classes by herself and a French night course with Hamid and her mother, but she never forgot about Amar, and after about a year of not speaking, sent him an email. And by the beginning of 2009, they were sneaking around again. Sometimes they would meet up at McDonald's, sometimes at the school library. And sometimes they would meet up with Sahar and her new boyfriend. It was Zainab who first introduced the pair to each other. Ricardo Sanchez was a recent immigrant from Honduras and enrolled in Zainab's French class. He was 21 at the time, 4 years older than her younger sister. But Zainab wanted him to meet Sahar so badly that she brought him to her school. They could barely communicate. He spoke Spanish and she spoke English. And in the beginning, Ricardo thought her name was Natasha. But they were soon spending every possible moment together. One time, Ricardo saw bruises on Sahar's arms and leg. She said she got them from a fall, but he didn't believe it. He thought it looked like someone hit her. Sahar never told him about the abuse at home. He thought the relationship had to be kept secret due to religious differences. But Gidi knew about Ricardo. She knew everything about Sahar. The two were as close as sisters could be. And Gidi, now 13 years old, was also becoming rebellious. She never lived a day in Afghanistan and grew up attending a Dubai private school. Now living in Canada, she had absolutely no interest in her father's conservative traditions and didn't really care if he knew it. She loved makeup and fashionable clothes, and on the days she didn't skip school, Gidi hid out in the bathroom. During parent-teacher interviews, Shafia complained about his daughter pulling the same antics in grade school, and asked that her behavior be logged in a daily agenda book. But her behavior never really improved. It wasn't really surprising then when Gidi became the focus of one of her father's most violent outbursts. In early April 2009, she was at the mall with her sister and brother, A and B. When they arrived home late, Shafia was so enraged that he and Hamid lashed out at all 3 of them, screaming and slapping. A and B would later downplay the incident. For Zainab, who watched it all happen, the abuse became unbearable. Days later after this incident, Zainab made a brave decision. She escaped. April 17, 2009 was a day of chaos at the Shafia home. Tooba had returned home to find a note from Zainab, saying that she was leaving home and didn't want any contact with them. Amar had arrived earlier in the day to take her to a women's shelter called Passages, a safe haven for women ages 18 to 30 having difficulty in their lives with issues such as violence or drug abuse. Social workers at Passages didn't know what to make of Zainab, saying that she wasn't their usual type of clientele. For Zainab, the experience was freeing. She could come and go from the shelter as she wished, and Amar acted as the go-between with her family. Meanwhile, the situation at the Shafia home was deteriorating. 4 of the Shafia children had learned of Zainab leaving through a phone call from their mother. Feeling anxious and upset, they walked up to a stranger on the street and said they were afraid to go home. The police were called and officers arrived to speak to the children, before driving them home around 4 p.m. But Hamid and Tooba were too preoccupied with Zainab's disappearance. Mohammad even called 911, telling the dispatcher that his older sister, who was a few months shy of her 20th birthday, had run away.
Phone 911.
Yeah, I wanna. There's a person missing in the family. I wanna report that.
In your family?
Yeah.
Is that your
Sister?
Your sister? How old is she?
She's 19.
And when the operator asked what the note said, Mohammad replied, quote, "I would like to live my own life." The operator asked Mohammad if his sister had been having problems, but his answers were vague, and police were dispatched to the home. But then, after a few minutes went by, Mohammad called 911 again, telling the dispatcher they didn't come yet, and again explained that his sister simply walked away from the house that morning and left a note. They really need to edit the Canadian Immigration Handbook that states for emergencies dial 911. Needless to say, in a city of over 2 million people, this call was low on the list of priorities. Anne-Marie Choquette was one of the Montreal constables who responded to the scene. She and her partner found the kids standing on a street corner, still too afraid to go home, and escorted them the rest of the way. Outside the house, Choquette interviewed each one of them alone. Guidi told the officers about the mall incident the week before, how her dad pulled her hair, and Mohammad punched her in the face. She also said, without hesitation, that Shafia often threatened he was going to kill them. Choquette noticed that A had a mark near her right eye, and B, her brother, told the officers that Mohammad kicked him and his dad threatened to tear him apart. Like Guidi, Sahar said Mohammad had slapped her, and that she watched as Shafia beat up Zainab because of her boyfriend. She and Guidi also said they wanted to leave the home because there was a lot of violence and they were both afraid of their father. The kids were still outside when Mohammad Shafia pulled into the driveway. According to Choquette, the demeanor of the children changed immediately when Shafia arrived home. He just looked at the children and they stopped talking. A was in tears and immediately recanted everything she said, insisting it wasn't true. And he spoke to the children in Farsi, which of course the officers couldn't understand. Around 9 p.m. that evening, a worker from DPJ, Quebec's Francophone Child Welfare Agency, was dispatched to the house. It was Batshaw, the Anglophone service, that responded to Sahar's original complaint the year before. The social worker spoke to Shafia, Tooba, and Mohammad, but decided it was safe to leave the kids and continue his investigation after the weekend. Choquette thought there was ample evidence to lay criminal charges, but following standard protocol, she left the decision to DPJ. No charges were ever laid, and 2.5 months later, Montreal police would be assisting in a mass murder investigation. Meanwhile, Mohammad and Mohammad were obsessed with trying to find out where Zainab was to bring her home. On April 19th, 2 days after the interview at the Shafia home, Constable Choquette arrived at the station to find the two men waiting for her. They wanted to know if she had any updates about Zainab's location. She didn't. Constable Choquette contacted Amar, who assured her that Zainab was fine and that her leaving was entirely voluntary. However, Mohammad and Mohammad continually harassed Amar, at one point telling him, quote, "If you don't tell us where she is, we're going to the police to make a complaint against you." At this point, Amar and Zainab made a trip to the police station to let them know that she was safe and had left her home because she didn't want to be there. The police then told the Shafia men to leave her alone. On April 20th, the Monday after Zainab left, the case file landed on the desk of Lauriane Lefebvre, a Montreal detective who covered child abuse cases. Accompanied by a DPJ worker, she visited the kids at school and re-interviewed 3 of the 4. Although A continued to recant, the other 2 didn't back down. Giti wanted immediately to go into foster care, while Sahar provided more details about her abusive older brother. While their dad was away, she said, Mohammad was the boss, and Sahar was wearing makeup and jewelry and no hijab, telling the officer that she would change her clothes at school in the morning and again before going home. No charges were ever laid, and for reasons that remain unclear, DPJ also closed its file. The warning signs, though, were everywhere. With Zainab gone, Gidi didn't go to school for more than a week. Sahar did, but she was often in tears, guarding the truth about her sister by telling teachers and classmates that she was in a coma. At the end of April, their daughter was still in hiding, and Shafia and Tooba were summoned to the school yet again, this time to talk about the kids' slipping grades and poor attendance. At this point in the story, the girls only had 8 weeks left to live. Zainab was still living in the shelter when Rona overheard a conversation so terrifying that she shared it with her sister in France. She overheard Shafia saying, "I will go to Afghanistan, I will prepare the documents. I will sell my property, and I will kill Zainab. I will kill the other one too." Rona was sure that the other one was her. Her sister told her to not be afraid, that this wasn't Afghanistan or Dubai. This was Canada, and nothing bad would happen. Then a meeting was arranged between Tooba and Zainab in a neutral location, in a public area, near a souvenir shop and tourist information. It was Tooba who convinced her daughter to come back home, promising that if she really loved Amar, they could get married. Zainab returned to her parents' house May 1st, 2009, right after her dad flew to Dubai for another business trip. He would be gone for several weeks, and May 18th was set as the date for Amar and Zainab's wedding, although no one in the family liked the idea of her marrying outside the Afghan community. And as the wedding day approached, Tooba kept pressuring her daughter to back out of it. She even enlisted the help of one of her brothers, Fazil Havid, who ran a pizza parlor back in Sweden. But after numerous telephone conversations, Havid said he realized exactly what Zainab was doing, saying that she wanted freedom and that she knew it wasn't her time to get married but felt like she was forced to get married to get out of the house. Zainab also told Fazil about Hamid's role, assigned by their father to spy on her, and that he was always following her. At the very least, Havid wanted to travel to Montreal to meet Amar and his family, to make sure he could provide a proper life for his niece. As it turned out, Fazil was also getting information about the Shafia household turmoil from another inside source, Rona. Twice she called him from a payphone, letting him know that visiting was a dicey idea. Fazil and Shafia had not spoken since 1992. When they were fleeing Pakistan and the two had a disagreement over the ownership of a vehicle. Out of respect, at the end of May or early June 2009, he phoned his brother-in-law in Dubai to make sure he would accept a visit. And Shafia acted like he was expecting the call. Quote, "He told me, I just want some help from you." According to Fazil, Shafia tried to enlist his help to murder Zainab. He said that Shafia was extremely angry, calling his daughter a whore and a prostitute, and outlined a plot to have Tooba, Zainab, and one of the younger sisters travel to Sweden for a visit to end her life and maintain his honor. Shafia's plan included a seaside family barbecue, and they would throw Zainab in the water. Zainab couldn't swim, so she would certainly drown. Hafid apparently swore at Shafia and hung up on him, and then rushed to warn both Tooba and another brother living in Montreal, telling her that if he wants to take her on a trip, to not accept. His sister thanked him, but for reasons that he never fully explained, Havid never warned his niece. With Shafia out of the country, Sahar was spending even more time with Ricardo. According to his aunt, they were talking about running away together to Honduras. One of Sahar's dreams was to rescue Giti. One day at school, she asked her math teacher if she would ever be allowed to take her little sister if she moved out. Her teacher advised against it, telling Sahar that a 13-year-old girl belongs with her parents. When Giti found out, she was inconsolable, to the point where her teacher and the vice principal spent an entire lunch hour trying to calm her down. 13-year-old Giti was probably the most defiant of the Shafia sisters. Over the course of the 2008-2009 school year, Giti had missed 40 classes and was late 30 times. She was failing in all of her courses and had been sent home one day for wearing a revealing sweater and makeup and earrings considered inappropriate for a 13-year-old. When she died 7 weeks later, police found a notebook full of affectionate doodles and notes to her sister Sahar. Back at home, Zainab had made up her mind. She was going to marry Ammar, regardless of what her family thought. So with Shafia still in Dubai, Tooba phoned an uncle, Latif Hidari, and asked him to organize the nikah, the Islamic marriage ritual. The ceremony took place on May 18th, 6 weeks before the murders. The next day before the reception, Zainab had her hair styled and her hands painted with henna. Latif Hidari drove her to the restaurant, and on the way he tried to get Zainab to reconsider the marriage one last time, but she could not be swayed. She said, quote, "Dear uncle, there has been a lot of cruelty towards me. I sacrificed myself for my sisters, so they will get this freedom after me." That freedom, as it turned out, was brief. Nobody from the groom's family showed up to the service. Ironically enough, they didn't approve of the marriage either. For Tooba, the embarrassment was just too much. She fainted on a chair, and people were throwing water on her. Like so many other things about the Shafias, the events of that day depend really on who was doing the remembering. But one thing is clear, Zainab asked for a divorce, and Ammar agreed. She told him, quote, "I can't do this, I can't ruin my family's reputation." They were divorced right there at the restaurant and were husband and wife for barely 24 hours. Afterwards, the family gathered at Hidari's house, with Tooba still crying. But by the end of the night, a plan had already been concocted to restore the family honor. Around this time, Zainab's cousin, Hussein Hidari, arrived home, completely oblivious to the family drama. According to Latif, Tooba said to Hussein that it was he who should have started a relationship with Zainab. Hussein said he would consider it, but only if Zainab agreed. The family went outside so Zainab and Hussein could talk. And after about 20 minutes, the young couple announced that the engagement could move ahead. It's hard to know why Zainab agreed to this. Perhaps this was just another way for her to get out of her father's house with a more acceptable husband. When Hidari phoned Shafia in Dubai, he seemed to approve of the idea. But the response wasn't what Latif expected. He made it clear that he didn't want the boy anywhere near his daughter until he returned to Canada. Shafia was obsessed with Zainab's behavior, according to Latif, saying that he wasn't happy and she didn't do a good thing, and that if he was there, he would have killed her. Latif couldn't believe what he was hearing. In his eyes, Zainab made a mistake and was trying to correct it. But Shafia could not be convinced. He even accused Latif of arranging the marriage as a way of trying to get to his wealth. And there were other darker dynamics at play within the Shafia home. Sahar told her vice principal that her younger brother was spying on her at school. He didn't like her friends and threatened to tell their father that she was a whore. Now, why would her younger brother call her this? Because at this point, he knew about her boyfriend, who she had been dating for about 4 months. Sahar was petrified that B would reveal her secret. On May 30th, exactly 1 month before she died, she fainted in class and had to be rushed to the hospital. But by then it seems her secret had already been exposed. On June 1st, Hamid took a flight to Dubai to join his father. He brought with him a black Champion brand suitcase and a Toshiba laptop. This laptop would later be seized by investigators during the raid on the Shafia home. The night before, Mohammed, Tooba, and Hamid were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. They also found a boarding pass stuffed inside his suitcase, along with various photos of Sahar and Ricardo taken straight from her cell phone and developed into prints. Constable Derek Frawley, a certified forensic computer analyst, sorted through 278,000 entries on the laptop and found some unusual Google searches. As soon as her brother left for Dubai, Zainab sent another email to her now ex-husband, telling him, quote, "We had an amazing love story together." The very next day, on June 3rd, someone in Dubai entered the following Google search on Hamid's laptop. The search read, quote, "Can a prisoner have control over their real estate?" On Monday, June 5th, Sahar told a teacher how worried she was. As her teacher put it, She said she was afraid that her brother was going to tell her father that she was a whore. The 17-year-old was in such a state that the teacher phoned DPJ yet again. Because Sahar was 6 months away from her 18th birthday, the worker on the other end suggested that she find a shelter. While Mohammad was in Dubai, those strange Google searches continued. One of these searches was Canada, mountains with lakes in Quebec. The following Monday, Sahar met with another social worker. Like so many previous times before, she told the social worker about her tyrant of an older brother and about her desire to find a job. She also opened up about wanting to become a gynecologist and helping the women of her home country, Afghanistan. The following night on June 9th, Zainab sent another email to Amar. She had not seen her dad since she left the house months ago, and he was due home in a few days. The email read, "I must go to the airport and say sorry. I hope he forgets everything." 3 weeks after this email was sent, she would be dead. At this point in the story, Geeti was hardly going to school at all. And while Shafia was gone, Geeti was also caught shoplifting at Walmart. She tried to steal a pink camisole and some leggings. She was getting more brash and more uncontrollable each day. And she told anyone who would listen that she wanted out of the house. And Mohammad and her parents probably realized that she wouldn't keep quiet if Zainab and Sahar turned up dead. She would be the first to call the cops and blow the whistle. Meanwhile, Rona's isolation was also increasing. Fahima Vergetz never met Rona face to face, but she did speak with her on the phone at least 100 times in the year before her death. Vergetz's uncle was married to one of Rona's sisters and lived in Virginia. According to Fahima, Rona was afraid to stay and she was afraid to leave. She said Shafia threatened he would find her and kill her. Rona had talked to Vergetz about getting out of the Shafia home and possibly moving to America or Europe where she had family. The last time the two spoke was at the end of April 2009, during the chaotic time period when Zainab was in the women's shelter. Vergetz left for Afghanistan with her US-based group, Women for Afghan Women, on May 1st, 2009, and returned to Virginia on July 1st, the day after the murders. And on her phone were multiple voicemails from Rona. Vergetz recalled that the messages sounded desperate. It sounded like she was in big trouble. But because Rona always used a payphone, Vergetz had no way to contact Rona. Meanwhile, Shafia and Mohammad returned from Dubai and landed in Montreal on June 13, 2009. Apparently, Shafia kissed Zainab on the forehead and told her she was forgiven, and in his version, he also slipped her a $100 bill. But of course, all was not forgiven. He just wanted his daughter to assume everything was fine. And during those last few weeks before the girls died, those weird Google searches on Mohammad's computer intensified. Those searches include mountains on water in Quebec, to rent a boat in Montreal, facts, documentaries on murders. On June 19th, Mohammad cancelled Zainab's cell phone plan. The day after that, his mobile phone traveled all the way and back from rural Grand Rimouski, Quebec, nearly 300 kilometers from their Montreal neighborhood. His internet research had escalated into full-blown obsessive. He wasn't even trying to attempt to hide what he was doing. At the Shafia home that night, on June 20th, Mohammad's laptop conducted yet another Google inquiry. Where to commit a murder. His sisters and his stepmother only had 10 days left to live. On June 22nd, the morning after Father's Day, Ricardo sent a text to Sahar in Spanish. It read, "I love you with all my heart, and I can't love anybody more beautiful than you, because you are like the air I breathe every morning and the sun that warms me up." A few hours after Sahar read that message, her father purchased a used car, a 2004 Nissan Sentra, black with a gray interior, just over 100,000 kilometers. The next afternoon, the trunk was full of luggage, packed up for a summer vacation. As far as the children knew, they were going on a road trip. On the way out of town, while stopped at a fruit stand, the family bumped into Latif Hadari. At this point, Tooba's uncle was anxiously waiting to hear from Shafia to finalize the engagement plans. He said that Tooba didn't look like herself, she looked scared and was in an unusual condition. When Fazil Havid heard about the vacation, he couldn't stop thinking about that phone call with his brother-in-law. The trips Shafia wanted to take to Sweden, the picnic by the water, and the murder of Zainab. Fazil said he sensed that something was going to happen. What happened on that trip will never 100% fully be known. But because Sahar was pretty much texting throughout the entire trip, investigators were able to retrace the family's exact route, down to the minute. They traveled in 2 cars split between the Lexus and the Nissan, even though the family owned a Montana minivan. The Shafias left Montreal shortly after 3 p.m. on June 23rd. And from the beginning, it was a strange trip. They headed straight to the village of Grand Ramos on the Gatineau River, the same remote place that Hamid visited the day his laptop was searching for where to commit a murder. When they arrived just before sunset, the sisters met with a woman walking some puppies. Sahar took a picture of Gidi holding one of the dogs, and Shafia and Hamid went for a walk. If Grand Ramos was supposed to be the crime scene, something happened to change the original plan. Because after sleeping at a motel and stopping to barbecue chicken kebabs by the waterside, the family got back inside the cars on June 24th and headed south towards Ottawa. When plotted on a map, their trip at that point was basically a 450-kilometer horseshoe, and when the police dug deeper, their route got even more suspicious. They traveled westbound along Highway 401. By now, it was evening and they were approaching Kingston, where they decided to take a bathroom break. The 2 vehicles turned off the Highway 15 exit, going north for a short distance. They then turned left onto Kingston Mills Road, with Sahar's text messages pinging off of each passing cell tower. For at least 40 minutes between 8:36 p.m. and 9:16 p.m., her phone came in contact with only one cell tower, the tower nearby Kingston Mills, a historic lock station at the southern tip of the Rideau Canal. As far as bathroom stops go, this was a weird choice as it wasn't even close to the highway. Back in the vehicles, the family kept driving all the way to Niagara Falls, reaching their motel at 1 a.m. on June 25th. The Shafias stayed in Niagara Falls for 4 days. They visited all the tourist sites, ate fast food, and went to a mall. From the cell phone photos that Sahar took, she appeared to be a typical teenager on a typical family vacation. But her actual phone records revealed something much more disturbing, and provided police with some of their most important evidence. On the night of June 27th, just 2 days after the Shafias arrived in Niagara Falls, someone using Sahar's phone called Hamid's number. That signal bounced off a tower just 16 kilometers from the Kingston Mills Locks. Hamid or Shafia, or both of them, had left the rest of the family and driven 5 hours back to Kingston to examine their chosen crime scene one last time. If it was Sahar who dialed the number, she had no way of knowing that Hamid's cell was all the way back in Kingston. It was only after she died, and police combed through her cell records, that they discovered this lead. What is clear, though, is that Sahar took full advantage of her brother being absent. She talked to her boyfriend for more than an hour that night, and twice more the next morning. The Shafias checked out of the Days Inn on June 29, 2009, at 6:45 p.m. Conveniently, a very odd time to check out, especially since the family had a 7-hour drive to Montreal ahead of them. According to Shafia, they made the decision as a family to leave so late in the day. A surveillance camera in the lobby recorded Hamid paying the bill for both rooms, in cash of course. It was 8 p.m. by the time the cars drove onto the highway. Just another part of their sinister plot. Leaving this late would guarantee that the women were sleeping or at least groggy when they were attacked. Hamid and Mohammad were in the front seat of the Lexus, with Hamid driving, and in the second vehicle was Tooba, as she was the only licensed driver in the family. As the 2 vehicles drove east along the QEW, Sahar continued to text message along the way. Approaching Rona, they took a scenic detour and headed downtown. At 9:39 p.m., from inside the car, Sahar took a picture of the Rogers Center. 3 minutes later, she snapped a picture of the CN Tower. The cars drove north onto Yonge Street and up through the city, turning east onto Highway 401. Around 10:30 p.m., they stopped at a McDonald's in Ajax. During the bathroom break, Tooba had a short phone call with one of her brothers. He was worried, and he wanted to check in to make sure Shafia had not followed through on his threats to kill. By 10:54 p.m., the family was on the road again. At this point, the prosecution believed Shafia was behind the wheel of the Nissan. The family drove right past all the major exits for Kingston, the ones full of signs for hotels and fast food. At Highway 15, the city's final off-ramp, they turned north and steered towards the locks. At this point, it was almost 1:30 in the morning. At 1:36 a.m., Sahar's phone received its last text message from Ricardo. As the murderers correctly predicted, the women were sleepy as they pulled into the Kingston Mills parking lot. Shafia got out of the Nissan and Tooba got in. Her job was to sit and wait there with the girls while her husband and son went looking for a motel. In the early morning hours of June 30th, Robert Miller's phone rang. He was the manager of the Kingston East Motel and lived in the apartment right behind the office. The man on the speakerphone wanted to book some rooms for the night. Miller checked the clock beside the phone. It was 2 a.m. Waiting at the office door were Shafia and Hamid. They needed 2 rooms for the night. But when asked how many people were staying, they seemed confused. Their initial answer was 6. Then Hamid said there might be 9. And that's when the manager said they sort of looked at each other and settled on 6. They spoke in a language that Miller didn't recognize, and Hamid paid in cash. They then dropped off the other 3 children, A, B, and C, at the motel. And then Shafia and Hamid drove out of the parking lot, turning left towards the locks. Miller had looked out the office window and saw the SUV the family arrived in backing away from the building. The only way in and out of the motel was along the driveway running past the office. Miller thought this was strange, as barely 20 minutes had passed since the pair first showed up at the office door. And even stranger was the direction where the SUV was heading. It turned north, towards the 401, when going south would have taken them to downtown Kingston. Miller was now curious and decided to stay up a while to see when the vehicle would return. But as of 2:26 a.m., the car was still gone. He wondered, why would 2 people in the middle of the night book a room for 6 people and then almost immediately drive off again? There are 3 people who know where the exact murder location was, but none of them are talking. To this day, it still remains a mystery, but somewhere within that isolated lock station, the 4 women were held underwater, one by one, until they stopped moving. All of them, with the exception of Sahar, had bruises on the top of their heads, suggesting that an assault occurred within those final moments. The bodies were piled back inside the Nissan, with the front seats reclined. The 3 killers were trying to stage a traffic accident, and to convince the cops that this was really a tragic late-night joyride. But it was an awkward place to fake a traffic accident. Just to reach the edge of the water, the Nissan would have to jump over a high curb, drive across some grass, make a hard left around a rock outcropping, and then a quick right around a narrow wall. The route looked nothing like a traffic accident. Once the vehicle was in position, the driver left the engine running and got out of the car. They reached through the window and moved the gear shift into first, assuming that this would be enough power for the car to go over the concrete lip and into the water. But things didn't go as planned. The front of the wheels went over the ledge, but the rest of the vehicle didn't. So with the car dangling in plain sight, the killers only had one choice. They drove the Lexus behind the Nissan and rammed it into the water. This collision shattered the SUV's left headlight, leaving bits of broken plastic scattered all over the ground. Before fleeing the scene, the killers rushed to pick up all of the broken pieces. Except they didn't get them all. And this is where we will leave things for now. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to hang out with me today. In the next video, I'll be covering the police investigation, the arrests of Mohammad, Tooba, and Hamid, and their trials that followed. So if you enjoyed learning about this case, be sure to tune in for part 2. If you have a case you would like me to cover in a future video, let me know down below in the comments section. To support my channel, go to Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to donate. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.